have a feeling I might want to refer to it in the
I
future.
just started the recording. So
Great, thank you.
we are working on converting the command line to-do list to Postgres, add the database, switch from the JSON file to the database. So all we've done so far is create the schema, create the database, and now we're looking at PG documentation to figure out how to actually talk to the database.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's your like getting started example, which may be close to what we need. And they've got it two different ways. So the first way is with like async await, which is probably not what you want right now, unless you've got all that Babel stuff set up and are familiar with async await. So maybe callbacks
Yeah, I'm
is
not
what we
comfortable
want.
with that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, so that second example is probably a good example. So you're doing the required PG and you get this client class, you sort of create a new client and then connect. Excuse me. Sorry. Ooh, this cough.
I still think to like continue to build. I think I'm gonna do some practice about this building very basic apps and playing the body parts, or do I take it way further?
Should I would feel like, should I have to connect in each file?
You won't. Yeah, once we start refactoring this out to like do this in multiple files, a lot of this like database setup and connecting code will get moved into a different file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, insert. Values.
I have a question. If you just do client.connect, does it just connect to your default database?
Yeah, you're going to need to give it some parameters to connect to the correct database.
Okay.
So, under connecting.
Is there any more documentation about?
Yeah, so there's like a
connecting?
section on connecting, and so by default it's like looking for environment variables. But then down below there's that programmatic section, and that's probably more what you want.
So if you have like a .env file with the PG environment variables, it'll look there first.
Yeah. If you're setting environment variables somehow by using like a .env or something like that, it will, it'll check for those environment variables. It's probably more. Yeah, so you can do it. You can do it either way. And if I remember right, you don't have to specify things that you don't need explicitly. So like it assumes that you're operating on localhost. It assumes the database is running at the default port. And I don't think you have a username and password set up by default on your database. So the only thing you really need to specify here, I believe, is the database itself. Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully this works.
Yeah.
So for this one, if it's a primary key, we don't need to specify.
The ID. Yeah.
Values. Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that that syntax insert into to-do list dot task. I don't think that's right unless Postgres allows you to do stuff I'm not familiar with. I think you need to say like space and then put task into parentheses. Yeah. Yeah. That's the syntax I'm more familiar with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I assign this to a variable? I know that this, well, I assume that this has to be the variable here.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a callback here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that second argument is actually an array because theoretically you could have like $1, $2, you could have lots of stuff there. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the callback.
So in the tests, I did a few simple tests here, and this is basically asking a few questions. I know that this was not part of the test, but I wanted to.
And this ends the program, or it ends the connection with the database.
Oh, let me see here. Client.end. Yeah, it closes down the database connection, which I don't think you need to do in this case. I think like the database connection is going to get itself cleaned up when your program exits.
Okay.
I don't think you need to explicitly say .end there.
Okay.
And you probably don't want to, because like if you happen to need to run a second query before the program exits, then you've like already closed your connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can leave that out.
And should I toss this into line 18?
Yeah, or you could put it in like a function further down in, like in the file that you call on line 18.
So I could put this in a function?
Yeah, it's like either way, you're probably going to want to eventually have this in a function that's just like add task to database or something like that, that just handles this like database part. Mm-hmm.
And I know there's different ways that I can put this. And I'm going to take some time on the weekend to think about it. And but I did create another table called shopping cart, and the intention was to reference grocery items and shoppers together in one area.
New task.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could just call this task.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I created the shopping cart just to kind of get something. So.
This should be it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That should work. You may want to have some sort of like logging in the case that it works. I don't know. Did your program before, like once if the task was added successfully, did it give you some message saying like, yeah, there you go?
How do I?
But obviously that makes no sense. But I was just kind of
How do I
So that's going to need to go in the callback, right? Because it needs to happen like after the query is complete. So you may want to just like pass the callback into your add to database function instead of defining it like in line there. But either way will work, yeah. And then so the result, when you say insert into to-do list task values, that result should have the row that was inserted. You may need to add something. Returning.
of a given table. So
Okay, so yeah, so after your
that's my understanding of the relationship.
your query, I think, needs to end with like a returning statement to have it like automatically return the new.
Sorry. It makes
The new values. So you could say, I think it's returning, and you can't just say like returning star, or you can say returning ID. Yeah, if you don't need the whole thing. Yeah. So then you should be able to get at that ID through that response object. Looks like you were already looking at the docs for that response object.
Yeah, we're trying to.
It's like a specific.
Let's see.
It's like a specific. It's that unique identifier for every other.
Oh, I could do it as a promise?
So it's that identifier that says this is this particular.
Ooh.
Can we do it as promises?
I guess so. I didn't know that was built in.
That we know.
That'd be nice. Huh.
Sorry, Brittany, I'm just taking a moment to catalog.
Oh, yeah, supports for promises. Okay, cool. That's certainly nice. Yeah.
Every field in this table. So it's like that primary reference. I think that you can reference for all the data.
This is looking right so far.
Anything beyond that, I
think maybe you got an extra parenthesis on line 13.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. And if I'm looking at these docs right, it looks like the response that comes back has a rows.
that's actually probably a massive thing.
A rows attribute. So if you look at, there's not a line number, but if you look down in that promise area, it's like query and then result console.log result.rows 0.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like you're going to get like rows back. It's like an array containing all the objects that have been returned. In your case, there'll just be one.
There was a field, or I think there was a res.fields thing elsewhere too when you were scrolling earlier. I'm not sure if I saw that right, but yeah.
Right. But I think that's just like the name of the fields.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think if you do like rows, it'll get the array. And you could just, I mean, we could play with it, right? You could log out result.rows there and then see what you get and build on that.
Let's just start there.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right, everything looks good, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a little different, but I think that was my intention.
.js. Oh, huh. Oh, because I put task, not tasks. Oh, I need to give it permissions, so I just copied it over. I'm completely spacing on.
Yeah, that was right. You got the right for you're starting right. So, and if you get to a command like this and you can't remember the syntax, remember there's the man command. It'll just bring up the like. You need to usually say like the command name -- help or man space command, and it'll bring up documentation for that command.
And I don't have an effective join that brings in many.
This one is it is a lot of information. If you scroll down, so one thing I've learned is if you scroll down to the bottom of these man pages, a lot of times they just give you examples of like common things, which sometimes is enough to spark your memory.
I just think it's plus X.
Yeah, that's in my head. That's what it is too.
Yeah, that's right.
That I don't have a proper join to bring in multiple grocery items. I don't think I see that referencing grocery items ID. So yeah, I can have like
Test.js.
looking at it here.
Yeah, that's the name of the file.
I don't have individual. It's everything is
Add.
Ooh.
right.
Null value in column ID violates not null constraint.
How do I get around that?
So that sounds to me like an issue with your schema. So your schema should be sort of like automatically inserting. Your table should be automatically inserting an integer into that ID when it's created.
Like cereal or something.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. Now how do I roll back?
Gotcha. So probably the easiest thing to do is just drop that table and then like run the schema file through again.
Is there a drop DB?
There might be, but you don't want to drop the whole database. You just want to drop the table. You could you could like remove and recreate the database too, I guess. One thing you can do in your schema file, I think, so in MySQL, and it's probably the same in Postgres, you can say drop table if exists. Let me see if that's a Postgres thing. Yeah, drop table if exists and then the table name. And that way it'll just, whenever you're pulling in your schema, it'll automatically like clear any old table out of the way. Yeah.
What was the command again? PSQL. Oh God. To do this. Schema.
Other way. Yeah.
All right.
Did you put a semicolon?
Nope.
Yeah.
Syntax error in your serial.
Okay.
Primary
we may have
key.
to say like serial primary key instead of primary key serial. I think you're close.
Integer serial primary key.
I mean, maybe you don't need integer if you have serial.
Oh, that's possible. Yeah, serial may imply that it's an integer. I think that's right. Yeah, try just serial primary key.
Cool. It dropped the table
There we
and
go.
created the table.
Yay.
Awesome.
So now if you run that task add, does it work? Or fail for a different reason? A new, more exciting reason?
Create a test object.
Yay, okay. So we're getting that row 0 as an object. So probably we'll be able to just say
Hey, it
.g on
added.
that thing. Yay!
Check it out. Cool.
Look at that. You're a third of the way there.
Yeah. All right, now we have to figure out what log response rows. I think this might be.
Yeah, that seems like the thing to try.
Oh, there's this weird.
Oh, right, because it's just for stuff to happen.
Do we need to do the end?
Interesting. We might. That might be part of it.
it's an asynchronous function.
Where was that pasted in? Or
so I think it's just connection.end.
I think it's a client.end.
Client end, yeah.
It just allows you to check that the event.
does that belong there?
Maybe after the, yeah, that seems, well, what if it errors? Will it still end?
I don't know.
No, because you would get down to that catch in that case.
Maybe after add to database new task down in the next thing? Can you do it after?
Well, so it's happening asynchronously, right? So, yeah, let's see what people on the internet recommend.
Yeah, maybe we should look at their promise example.
Okay. Let me try.
Yes, so.
Cool.
So the idea was.
Oh, you got the ID too.
Yeah. All right, so this one is. Oh, and also it closed out too, so.
Yeah, because you had that dot end. Mm-hmm.
Cool. It's weird because the dot end isn't in these examples here.
Yeah, I mean, in most applications, like in a web application, you're going to have, well, for one thing, the application's like staying on as it's like handling multiple requests.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's going to be like some separate shutdown code that would handle like closing out the database. Or like it's getting told to shut down anyway, and then like the database is handling itself. The weird thing about these node scripts is that because everything's asynchronous, and I'm still learning exactly all the wrinkles to it, but Node's sort of like waiting around as long as there's like code running, as long as there's things happening, and having an open database connection like that is one of the things that just keeps the Node process alive.
Okay.
Trevor,
Mm-hmm.
what's a pool? I've been seeing that in the readings and stuff, but I just like specifically for database query or for relational database related things. I was just wondering.
Yeah. So the way a pool works is, well, let me go back. So when you've got a database that your application is talking to, you open up a connection to it, right? And so a connection is like it's usually a TCP connection, right? You're opening like a TCP socket to the database, and on top of that, there's other stuff that gets created on the server side. The server is sort of like registering you as a client. It's keeping track of some like state information about you. So it has a cost to open up that connection to the database. And often in a complex application, you're making lots of requests to the database. Sometimes multiple requests at once, right? If you're doing things asynchronously. And so opening and closing that database connection over and over again is expensive. It takes time to set it up, take time to tear it down. So you kind of want to leave it open and reuse it if you can. And you also get into situations where if you're making multiple requests to the database at once, you might need multiple connections open, right? And so what a pool does, think of it as like a pool in the sense of what's the word I'm thinking? Like like government officials, there'll be like a pool of vehicles that you can use if you're like a city congressman or whatever, right? It's that kind of pool. It's like a bunch of connections that get opened up as needed and then kept open, so that when your application says, "Oh, I need to do this query," it just asks the pool for a connection, and the pool says, "Okay, I've got 4 open connections. You can use this one. It's not being used right now." And the pool sort of manage like how many connections to keep open at one time, when to start closing off connections if they're not being used, when to start adding new connections if like requests start backing up. So it's sort of, a pool is an abstraction that manages like a bunch of connections to the database, and sort of manages like how many of them to keep open, and you sort of tell the pool that you want to run this query, and it'll run it on whatever open connection that it has.
So each connection can do one query at a time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then you can tell a pool have a maximum of 50 connections, but it'll only have as many open as it really needs. Like, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, this one.
Did the connection mess up?
I think so, because Trevor's video froze.
Yeah.
Right. So this one actually schedule a pause. So actually this one get all the so this is the one that actually get all the
Oh, we lost connection.
No, you're the host.
Oh dear.
I can ask you my office hours questions.
I may or may not have answers.
Right.
Hopefully he'll come back.
Hey, sorry about that.
Hey,
Hi.
welcome back.
Internet things. Did you hear the answer to your question? I don't know
No.
when I cut out.
I did not.
Okay. The last thing the last thing I was saying is, yes, that thing you said is just correct. You have understood
cool.
the concept.
Okay.
Yes to what you said. I think I was saying it's kind of like having phone lines at your house. Like if you had like 3 phone lines, connections kind of work like that, right? It's a thing that you can communicate on, but only one person can communicate on it at a time.
Okay, got it.
The pool is the thing sort of managing that resource of connections, and opening and closing them as needed. And
Is there any disadvantage to having like a high max number of connections? Like, let's say you suspect you'll need like 20 and you said 50 was the max?
So the number of connections it's not free, right? Every connection that you have open to the database taxes the database, right? The database has to manage all of those connections. So, if you think you need 20 and you end up opening 50, it's probably not the end of the world. But if you're running a massive website and each one of your web servers is opening up 50 connections to the database, and you have 300 web servers like managing your massive website, right? Well, now you've got like a ton of database connections, and that can actually start to cause problems for the database.
Oh, so it doesn't open them up as needed. It opens them all up when you make the pool.
Well, it depends on how the pool is implemented. If you're just setting a max connections, then yeah, it's not going to open them all up right away. Most pools wouldn't be implemented that way, right? A pool will usually like open up some default number, and then it'll have some algorithm for figuring out, when is it okay to start opening up new connections? How long do I wait to close connections? And so, yeah, you're not going to get 50 right away. So
what happens?
Go ahead.
What happens if you run out?
Run out of connections?
Yeah, let's say you have like 2, but you needed 4.
Right. So most likely what's going to happen in that case is that say you have 2 connections open to the database, and maybe that's your max connections for the pool. And then you try and make like 4 queries to the database simultaneously. So the first 2 will find an open connection, and then the third one will just have to wait. Okay. And it'll wait until a connection is open, and then it will get sent to the database. So if you have fewer than you need, it can just end up slowing things down if you're doing a lot of like parallel requests to the database. So this won't really come into play here where you've got like a command line application, right? And there's only one user. You're only ever going to be doing one query to the database at a time. But you can imagine if this were like a node, like an Express server, right? That's like responding to lots and lots and lots of requests from web browsers, then the connection pool becomes really important, right? You can service, you're servicing hundreds of requests. You can open up a connection pool that has like 4 or 5 connections to the database. And so, you definitely will be doing like multiple things at once if you have multiple people hitting your website simultaneously. But it's a lot more efficient not to open a database connection and close it every time someone requests a page from your site, right? You can just like reuse those connections for the next guest. And that's where it starts to matter.
Does every time a user connects to your web page, if you had a pool in your Express code, would every user get a pool?
No. I mean, the way that you'd want to set it up is so that the pool gets created when the server starts.
Okay, so the pool is for the whole world.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, that's why it becomes useful, right? Because you can just like set up a pool of a certain number of connections and then just reuse them for like all of the people hitting your website. And that's where you're tuning it for that trade-off, right? The more connections you have, the more simultaneous database queries you can run, which will make your site faster. But you're going to get to a point where too many simultaneous queries to the database and too many open connections actually starts to slow the database down, which will slow your site down again. So you're just trying to find that happy medium where the database is not overwhelmed, but you're not like queuing up requests needlessly.
I don't know if you have more on your questions on your app, Brianna.
I think this is a good starting point. We've got the ad working, which is really cool. And then I could just attempt to insert, or not insert. I think list is going to be the hardest one. I think I could possibly figure it out from here.
Cool. Yeah, it seems like you're on a good track there. And I would point you towards in the Node Postgres documentation that you've got open. There's a section there on if you scroll to the top, it's in the left nav. It says something about like structure or what's it called? Project structure. Yeah, and that might be worth reading through. It kind of has some suggestions for like how to set up your app so that you have like you only create the pool once. And then you so you don't have to like connect in a bunch of different files. It was kind of that question you were asking. And I think the short version in there is that you're going to like create, connect to the pool in one file that sort of holds all of your functions that talk to the database. And then just like use that as like a shared file, like export those functions to the places where you need them.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I always miss the first few minutes of your office hours because we have like a workout crew, but I put a question in the document.
That's yours. Okay, great. Yeah, we can totally talk about that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. When I got on, you were like here, but not actually here. And I was like, did you put this question in here? And it was just silence. And I was like, I guess it wasn't her.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we can talk about that. So
I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, sure. So the question, for those of you listening to the recording, if anyone does, if we had a domain, how would we have multiple apps on it? Do we just make different folder for each of them? Have their own app.js/node modules and then have a home app that routes to them? The answer to this question depends a little bit on how you're hosting this site. So is this a real world example of like a personal site that you have that you want to run multiple apps on, or?
Well, that's kind of what I was imagining is like if I did make a web page and I wanted to have like a portfolio page and have different examples all posted in the same spot, like could I have a bunch of different apps on one web page, or would I have to have a whole different web page for every app? I know
Yeah,
this is maybe kind of a very beginnery question.
Yeah. No, so it is possible to do that. And usually what you'll see is there's some web server kind of in the front that's like responding to requests. And then it's like forwarding requests back to different apps based on the path. So if you go to like my site / calculator, right? It'll like see anything that starts with / calculator and it'll redirect that request. It won't redirect it, but it'll forward that request to your calculator app that's running, and let it serve those requests.
And then the calculator app would have its own router and app.js.
Exactly. Right.
And the two routers wouldn't interfere with each other.
No. What's going to happen is that the HTTP request is going to have a path, right? Like /calc / whatever. And your calculator app is going to have to be aware of that, right? So you're going to have to let it know somehow that like, okay, all of the requests coming in are going to have this / calculator in the front of the path that you can just ignore, right? And then like serve things after that. Does that make sense? I'm not explaining this well.
Yeah, I'm probably going to have to ask about this again later when I like try to do it, but I was kind of curious.
Right. Yeah, so do you see this whiteboard? Let me see if this will work. Let me draw. So the usual architecture for this is you have something in the front that's called a reverse proxy, or sort of it's acting like that. I think that's the right way to say that. Reverse proxy. Yeah, sure. And so what you have is you've got the cloud of the internet out here, right? Here's the internet, and then you've got people sitting at their computers sending requests, right? And so you get this. You get these requests that come in. Well, just do this for simplicity. No, I know. I just want to grab. No, I don't want that. Sorry, I have not used this tool before. Just grab you and get over here. There we go. All right, so you got this request that comes in through the internet. It's going to hit this reverse proxy, and the request is going to be something like /calc /add, right? So it's hitting some endpoint in your calculator app. It's like the addition endpoint, say. And I know there's a way to move this. There we go. And so what happens is the reverse proxy will look at that request and say, oh, this is a request that starts with /calc, and it'll have rules in it that will tell it, okay, for that, you're actually going to send that request to this other app back here that's your node app that's running. So here's your calculator app. And it'll sort of like route that request back to this app.
And the reverse proxy is kind of like a router.
Yeah. It's a web server that's like routing requests, basically.
Okay.
So it's handling HTTP requests. And then when it gets one in, what it does is it turns around and it issues another HTTP request to another application. And then that application sends a response, and the reverse proxy takes that response and sends it back to the client. And the client is not aware that any of this is going on. It just thinks it's talking to one server. But this is super common. So you've got the responses coming back like this. And so the deal here is that the initial request has this /calc /add, and so somewhere that has to be taken care of, right? That like your calculator app, probably all of its routes don't start with /calc, right? It's just going to be the app /add. And so that needs to be taken care of somehow. Either that needs to be like stripped off before it's sent back, or more commonly, like your app here will just be configured to like strip off that of all requests coming in, that like /calc, or like to prepend that to all of its routes so that it's aware of that like prefix. And normally in this architecture, what's happening is that like this is a different this is running on a different port or on a completely different host from the reverse proxy.
Oh, okay.
So you could do it two different ways, right? You could have all of this stuff happening on the same server with the same IP address, right? And the reverse proxy is running on port 80 because that's what people are making web requests on. And then you have this node app is running on port like 8001. And then you have like another one that's running on port, you maybe have another app that's running on port, 802 or something like that. And so the reverse proxy is like initiating new HTTP requests back to the same server, but on different ports to hit these different apps. Or you could have a situation where it's proxying these requests back to completely different servers, maybe in like a data center or like a private network or whatever, and forwarding those things.
Okay.
But that's the general idea, is that you would have some HTTP server in the front acting as like a reverse proxy that's like forwarding those requests on to a bunch of different apps based on the path. Another thing that's really common is to do this, but instead of looking at the path, to look at the host name. So HTTP requests actually include the host name. So, like foo.com is actually in that request. And so you can actually have a bunch of host names that all resolve to the same IP address. So all these requests for all these different sites actually end up going to the exact same server. And the server just looks at the host name and says, oh, okay, you really want to talk to the calculator app, and it forwards you back there. So that you can run like a bunch of different sites on the same IP address or even the same server. And that's how something like Heroku works, where like it'll give you your own host name. But they're not spinning up a brand new server and a brand new IP address just for you. They're adding a rule into their reverse proxy that says, oh, when this thing comes in for trevor.herokuapp.com, forward it to Trevor's app on this IP, on this like port number that's running on the same server.
Okay. Well, I'll probably have more to ask about this later, but I guess
sure.
Hopefully you won't be my SVP for. I mean, no offense, but I'm hoping to test next week.
I see how it is. Hoping
to test next week. So I guess I'll be changing SVPs someday.
Well, you know where to find me still.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.